All right, so let's really focus on what you've done with the Michaela School that you started in 2014. There was a lot in the research that I was doing about discipline, really, before you even get to education. So you guys do a boot camp. Before you get to teaching them anything, you're actually teaching them some things purely about discipline and sort of how to live.
How to behave, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's because we believe if you haven't taught them how to behave, then you can't give them a detention for it because they don't know how. And the reason why they don't know how is because we know that elsewhere they haven't necessarily been taught. They haven't necessarily learned it at home. They certainly won't have learned it at other schools. And that's because our expectations are really high. And so we teach them, we have silence in the corridors, for instance. So that's something people come and they say, why do you have to be so extreme? I'll tell you why you have to be so extreme. Because otherwise, you've got kids fighting in the corridors, bashing each other's heads against the wall. Some schools where teachers are scared to walk through the corridors because it's such mayhem. You have silence. Everybody just moves really quickly to their lessons. You've got changeover that takes maybe a minute and a half. Children aren't losing loads of time from their lessons. I always say 59 minutes out of every 60 minutes in the lesson, you've got it at Michaela. And we're trying to catch them up. You know, a lot of our kids come to us with a reading age of a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old when they are 11 years old, in fact. Wow. I mean, some of them aren't like that. Some of them are Oxbridge material and will go to Oxford or Cambridge, and some of them need real help so that they don't leave school illiterate and innumerate. 20% of the kids in Britain leave school illiterate and innumerate, right? 20%, 1 out of 5 kids. Now, and that's functionally. So it looks like they can read, but they can't really read, right? And this is happening across the country, and it's become normal to expect that. Now, none of our kids are going to be in that position because we teach them. And we teach them in an environment where the children are able to respect their teachers. They love their teachers. They thank them for their lessons at the end of their lessons. They say good morning and good afternoon and so on, and things that you would never imagine. You know, inner city kids, you know, if you have an idea in your head of what inner city kids are like, you imagine the boys walking with their trousers down here in that bop kind of way, and girls dressing in a way that isn't appropriate. At our school, none of that exists.
So you do have a dress code, right?
Well, they have a uniform.
The uniform.
And that's normal. In Britain, everybody has a uniform.
Yeah.
But the thing is, we actually stick to the uniform. So you go elsewhere, their ties are down, the shirts are untucked, they look like a mess, they walk like a gangster. I'm always saying to the kids, if they ever start bopping like that, I say, you look like a gangster, you need to stop that, right? And they get it. They say, yeah, miss, yeah, I get it. And then they stop doing it. Because we talk about getting to the best universities. We want you to get to Ivy League universities, to get to Russell Group universities in Britain, and we want you to have, you know, you aim for the moon and you land amongst the stars. That's how we think, right? And so they're all really ambitious, and they're all working hard. Why anyone would be against this as a concept, right? I don't know.
So when you hear pushback against that, I guess it's that people think it's like presumptuous or something to imply that their parents can't do it, even if often the parents are failing. Or the parents just have to work too hard and they don't have time to do the things that you're doing. And I think then people think there's a racial element to that, sort of, if you even address that.
I actually think they have a problem with it itself. They don't like the idea of us being in authority. They don't like, they think being in authority means that we must be Nazis. I've been called a Nazi many a time, which is a bit ironic when you think that what the Nazis would have done to somebody like me, but
I've been called a Nazi too.
Exactly. So, and they don't like the idea of us being in authority and us being in charge. So, one, we're really key on discipline, but two, we want the discipline so that we can teach them properly. And this is where you were referring to what you said.
Yes.
I was watching you at the Oxford Union, and you said about how kids need to be taught properly, and you'd said they need to be taught critical thinking. And
take me to task, teacher.
Yeah. The thing is that you can't teach critical thinking, right? People are critical in their thinking, or independently minded or inquisitive when they know lots about something. And it's only by knowing lots. It's like the 10,000 hour thing. You know, you got Malcolm Gladwell, you got, you know, Steve Jobs, you got the Beatles. You spend a lot of time doing something, you will get really good at it, and then you'll be able to break the rules. But if you're trying to break the rules right away when you don't know anything, then you end up with kids, and this is the public don't realize just how bad things are, where kids don't know where Paris is. You know, kids don't know in Britain who Winston Churchill is. You know, they have no idea. And that's because nobody's taught them, because people are anti-knowledge. So the grandfather to like the whole knowledge movement is E.D. Hirsch, and he's an American. His most recent book is Why Knowledge Matters, which I would encourage all of your viewers to read. You know, education is the most important thing in any country, right? And that's one of the reasons why I'm so pleased to be talking to you, because people need to realize, you know, you can have all your arguments about free speech and about I don't know, guns and about whatever it is you want. But if the schools are not teaching children properly, then that is the end of any country, right? And I am desperately trying to shout as much as I can to tell people that we need to do something, and we are doing something. I mean, we're doing something, and other people, we're not the only ones, you know, there are other people who are doing things. We named Michaela after a woman who died of cancer who I used to work with, and she in her own classroom used to do exactly this, and there are teachers all over America and all over Britain doing this in their own classrooms. We need it to be more than that. We need entire school districts, you know, we need people to get this point. And when you said about teaching critical thinking, it's a romantic view that comes from Rousseau, so 18th century philosopher Rousseau, and he said, you know, man is born free, but everywhere in chains. This whole idea of education makes you less free. This is what the progressives think, and actually, self-control brings you freedom, right? It's counterintuitive, but actually order and structure make you free.
They allow you to pursue all those avenues of knowledge, basically.
Exactly.
Because you have a sort of center.
Exactly. If you learn lots about something, then you're able to apply that knowledge in different ways. So, I mean, as an example, you know, if you take a maths question that a primary school kid might be given, you know, John has 8 cents at the end of the day. It's 1/4 of what he had at the beginning of the day. How much money did he spend during the day? Now,
I think I can do it.
And I think you can too. And you
and
know
I'm
what?
terrible at math, but I think I can do it.
You know why I think you can do it is because you've got short-term memory and long-term memory. And you've got a whole bunch of math facts in your long-term memory that you're able to draw out. You're able to go quarter. No, there's 4 of those in a whole. And then you're able to go 4 times 8, because I know my 4 times table.
That's literally
and I can
what I did
take
in my
it
head. And then
to
you subtract
32.
one, yeah.
And then I can do subtraction, so I can take it to 24.
Yeah.
Right? Now, if you're 7 years old, however, if you have to hold all those facts in your working memory can't do it. You have got to drill and practice those timetable facts, for instance, and put them into your long-term memory, and put those fractions into your long-term memory, so that when somebody gives you something more complex, you can go bam, 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 and bring it out, and then you've got the answer. Sadly, what happens is people say, no, what we need to do is teach them complex problem solving. Let's give them that. First, you got to break it down. What are the bits underneath that you got to build up from? And that stuff is a bit boring, right?
Yeah.
And because it's boring and isn't very romantic, this Rousseau, I was talking about Rousseau. So Rousseau, this idea that you bring it out of the child, right? So they have this phrase which says, you know, the mind is not a vessel to be filled, but a spark to be ignited. And it all sounds really exciting and thrilling, right? And that's the thing, it's so seductive, it pulls everybody in. But the reality is that actually what you need is a whole lot of facts in your memory there that you can then go boom, boom, boom and apply. Now that doesn't mean that you're just a parrot and you just end up learning a whole load of facts which you then can just, you know, regurgitate. You need to apply them, and you need to give children the chance to apply them and have a class discussion, and we do paired work and so on. Often in more progressive places, they'll do group work. They'll put 5 kids, 4 kids around a table, and they do group work. And then what happens is the teacher moves amongst them as a facilitator of learning, as opposed to the teacher who's driving the bus. I always say the teacher needs to sit in the bus and drive, and the kids get on the bus with you and go. The more progressive way, you're there, just keeping them on task. You do that, let me come and see you, you do that. But they don't learn very much. And then they don't succeed. And then we say, it's because they were black, it's because they were poor. What we need to do is give them welfare, and then they'll be okay, because that will make them equal. And my point is, no, fix the education system, give them an education, and then they'll make themselves equal.
Gosh, this reminds me of, so I mentioned I'm not that good at math, and I remember the day, I haven't thought about this in probably 15, 20, I don't know, maybe 20 years. I remember being in 6th or 7th grade, and we were doing division for the first time.
Yes.
And I remember the teacher gave us, we had a quiz or something, and I was able to do it in my head. And they had, the equation, and I just wrote the answer. And she gave me I failed, or I got a 0 or something, even though I had all the answers right, and she said, you didn't show your work. Oh. And I remember saying to her, but I got all the answers right. And she said, no, I need to see how you do your work. Now, I didn't know how to do it that way, but somehow I was able to do it in my head. And I remember thinking that if that was all necessary to show the work, that at some point I would get to a place where I would have to do it. But somehow I had figured out my little trick first. But because of the way she kind of just failed me for it, it completely turned me off math. I literally haven't thought of that in probably 20 years or something. That's this total sidebar altogether. Right. But I guess it just goes to show that we all kind of learn differently, and you need teachers that can kind of embrace the way you do it a little bit rather than just jam it down your throat.
Yeah, well, you
which is probably a little bit of the progressive thing that you don't like, in a way.
Yeah, what I would say is, you remember that particular incident and think that's all it was, but I guarantee you that had you been taught properly in that classroom, you would have known her methods.
Yeah.
You would have known what to write down. You didn't know what to write down because there was too much chaos in the classroom. You weren't listening. You were busy talking to your friend because she let you talk, because she didn't have high enough standards of behavior.
Well, and so you there? That sounds pretty spot on.
Yeah, well, and that's it, because this is just standard. This is just what happens in all classrooms. And then people think, it's mean to make kids behave. And after a while, the thing is that, remember, there's more of them than there is of us, right? So we're not actually making them do anything. They want to behave. We're just creating an environment where they're able to do it, right? That's all. Now, there's the 10%. There's the 10% on the outskirts, that the detentions and so on, keep them in line, right? Mm-hmm. But the vast majority, you need that tipping point. The vast majority buy into what we do. And if you come visit our school, the kids will say to you, yeah, it's super strict, and yeah, we get detentions, but you know what? I get a great education. Yeah. And that's what I want, because I want the opportunity to be able to change my stars. And if you believe that, if you believe in equality of opportunity, which sadly I think too many people in education don't believe in equality of opportunity, if you do, then you want to provide an environment where they're going to be able to do that. And that's what we do. And I really hope those teachers who come and visit us, that they're able to take from that and do something in their schools.
Yeah, well, first off, I told you before we started, I'm going to be in the UK with Jordan Peterson for a couple stops, so I will do everything I can to stop by, and maybe I can get Jordan to swing by too.
Oh, wow, no, that would be great.
His daughter is Michaela, by the way, so there's
really?
Deep, powerful thing happening
That
there.
is deep and powerful.
What about the type of kids? You've mentioned that there's some diversity in the type of kids that are coming in. How do you guys decide who actually can cut it and who can afford it and all of that?
Well, it's not up to us who comes to us. It's the local council that kind of send kids to us. So we just,
how do they decide who goes?
Well, it's a lottery. And people apply, and then they get picked out of a hat, literally, and then they come. Some of the people, some of the kids who end up with us didn't even necessarily want to be with us. They just end up being pushed towards us because that's the way the system goes. I mean, frankly, I don't even understand the system, but we get a bunch of kids. We get 120 kids in every year.
So it's a pure lottery to get to the school.
Yeah.
So, and basically, if they don't win the lottery, so to speak, they're just going to the public school. Because at that point, most likely, the parents can't afford a private school, right?
Yeah, no, definitely the parents can't afford a private school. But there's no, I mean, you talk about it as if we're different. I mean, like, we're just another school. There's loads of schools like us, in that sense, around. I mean, we are a free school, but it's not like we're the free school and then there's the local public school. There's lots of schools. Mm-hmm. And parents will choose us if they want to. And as I say, sometimes we end up with with kids, because the system is such that you have to choose your top 5 schools. And if you've chosen us 5th, you probably don't want to be with us. But in the name of fairness, as it always goes, the people who have chosen us 5th have just as much of a chance getting in as the people who have chosen us first.
Your accent got very American there.
Oh, did it? Well, because of course I grew up in Canada, so it kind of changes. But yeah, so people who don't want to come to us, and people who do really want to come to us. And look, I call myself the Dragon Lady, and I say, you know what? I'm not going to change. And if you're happy to put up with me, these are the rules, and this is what we do. So if we hear your phone or if we see your phone, we'll take it, and we will keep it for up to 16 weeks. And that's the way that it is. These smartphones are killing kids.
I wanted to get there, yeah. What do you make of that? Because
it's a disaster. And in 20 years, people are going to know. When I say it now, people say, oh, you're being extreme. Some schools, they actually have these phones out in lessons. Lots of schools, they have them out in corridors and in the yard and so on. We have them banned completely. And I'm even trying to get parents to take them away at home. We sell brick phones, so a phone that you can't access the internet, so that we try and encourage parents to give them that. You want to keep in touch with your kid? Fine, I understand, but you don't need to give them a smartphone that accesses the internet. Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, all of those big guys in IT, they don't give their children phones until they're 15. They keep them away. When Steve Jobs in 2010 and the iPad came out and he was interviewed and they said, what did you think about, what do your kids think about the iPad? And he said, I don't know, I wouldn't give my kids the iPad. Right? They protect their children. Meanwhile, our parents have no idea. They're saving up for months to give their kids this Christmas present. And it's like giving them heroin. I say it's like playing Russian roulette, you give anybody access to your child on this phone, right? Yeah. Any weirdo out there knows where your child lives, knows how they go to school, knows where they go to school, knows who their friends are. They get involved. I mean, I don't understand. Well, the reason why people do this is because they don't know and they don't think about the dangers, not just with random people, but also lovely girls who get involved with the bad boys at school. Bad boys who might be criminals elsewhere, etc., and they quite like them, and they wouldn't otherwise know them, but maybe he's going to add me on Snapchat, woo, yeah. And this is the kind of, it's terrible.
What about just for attention spans? Because I would imagine you're dealing with a lot of that for young people right now, because of Snapchat, as you just said.
Exactly. So, before, when they used to watch, Dallas and Dynasty and so on, at least there was a narrative arc that went like this, and it told a story, and then something bad happened, and then it gets resolved and so on. That doesn't happen anymore. You got like 20-second, I went to the hairdressers, look at this man's bald head, ooh, end of the little ditty. That's what they're watching, right?
Right.
It's terrible. So smartphones are a huge problem for the inner city. But the biggest problem, I would say, are progressive teaching methods that have infiltrated our schools, and sadly this kind of Rousseauan idea that you're drawing something out of the child as opposed to putting something in. And the way in which over the last 50 years we have turned away from knowledge as being really important. This hits, of course, the most vulnerable. So working class kids, in our country, that tends to be a black thing in this country. In our country, in Britain, it'll be black kids, but it'll also be white working class kids. It'll be a variety of different kids who get hit by this. Because if you are from a richer background, your parents, you sit around the dinner table at night and you have dinner and you talk about the politics of the day and you learn about different countries and science and all sorts of things just through talking to your parents and to your parents' friends and your uncle and your aunt and so on. With kids whose parents are not well educated, they don't get that at home. So they're depending entirely on the school to give them what they need to be able to succeed. And sadly, because schools are convinced about this idea of this romance around thinking critically, and that's not to say we don't want them thinking critically. We do. Yeah. But you need to give them lots of stuff to get them to that point.
Right. So when I said that at Oxford Union about teaching critical thinking, it's not that you don't believe in critical thinking, of course. No. It's that you really, that's not something to teach, at least at first. It's that you have to give them all the breadth of knowledge first, and then they will learn how to critically think about all of these issues. Fair enough. I like taking some criticism.
Exactly.
I appreciate it.
And it's something that you're having to fight all over the place. And it's that idea of giving them that equality of opportunity, you see, which is what I keep coming back to, because
have you seen any instances where this doesn't work? I mean, have there been kids that come through and just for whatever reason, this this concept that you've built, that you're instilling in all these other students, it just does not work for them, either because of something about them or the family or
yeah.
or
So I've
anything
had
else?
to exclude a few children for knives. You know, that is something in the inner city that's a problem. You know, when we talk about inner city, you know, we've got kids showing up, you know, young men showing up on bikes with masks, carrying knives, waiting to meet some of our kids. You know, this is the inner city. So there are some of those issues that can take over, you know, but that doesn't mean that it hasn't worked. It always works. The kids always learn more than they've ever learned anywhere else. Mm-hmm. The kids always are stunned by their own intelligence and what is possible, because we show that to them. And it's, you know, and what kind of breaks my heart is that even those who are conservative, so I watch all your programs and you have all these great people who come on, but nobody ever talks about education. You know, Larry Elder, for instance, who I love and I think he's brilliant. Yeah. You know, he talks about all these things plaguing the black community, and he has all these stats that he always comes out with, and there's that thing where he takes you apart, you know.
You watched all my real moments, didn't you?
Yeah. But what he doesn't do, he talks about absent fathers, he talks about crime, talks about drugs and so on, but they never talk about education. And the thing is, education, that's not black people's fault, right? That isn't. That is the state, right? And the state needs to be held to account for this, because we spend in Britain £80 billion a year on the state education system, and yet we are failing all of our kids, and that isn't right. And Larry Elder and all of these people who talk, they need to be able to say, no, wait a minute, there's something going wrong at a very low level, because you can talk all you want about personal responsibility, but if you haven't got an education, it's very hard to make anything of your life.
So is the problem then that, at least in the American context, the answer always is throw more money at it? Mm-hmm. So it's not the real answer, which obviously we've spent 45 minutes talking about, which is why and how you have to clean up these schools. But the easy answer is always throw more money at it. If they just need more money, you know, you always hear these things. Well, they don't have enough pencils, and they don't have enough, you know, other supplies and notebooks and things. And that people don't take the next step, which would be the critical thinking step of the whole thing.
The
and go,
irony
it's not about money. You could throw money at anything.
Yeah, the irony is they all go on about critical thinking. They're not doing any critical thinking. You know, if only they would. But I wish, well, look, I mean, the left really refuse to recognize there's even a problem. The right will recognize that there's a problem, but they don't talk about it. So that's what I'm saying about the people who you interview and so on. I just wish more people would say, actually, the solution is in education, because it really is. The black community, for instance, you know, would transform if they were given the opportunity to have a great education. And that's not to say that all the things that Larry Elder talks about absent fathers and so on aren't a problem. Right. I mean, they are, absolutely. But it's really important to call them out on it. And it's really important to call out. You see, and this is where I would disagree. You know, I consider myself a conservative, I'm a black conservative, but I would disagree with some of the black conservatives out there who refuse to recognize racism as a problem at all. You know, they kind of just dismiss it. And I would say, no, it is a big problem. And the reason it's a big problem is because the left, in so many ways, are racist. You know, when they want to own us and they want to tell us how we can vote and they want to tell us how we can think, that is racism. And when they refuse to recognize what works in education that's going to help poor kids, black kids, you know, white working class kids in Britain, when they refuse to look at that, well, that's racist. And I'd say it's racist against the white working class. The way the white working class are spoken about in Britain is the way that sometimes the black communities are spoken about in America, which is like there's some kind of different, they're aliens. Oh, well, you know, that's just the way they are. No, that's not the way they are. Actually, if you give them the opportunity, but you all want to sit around dinner parties and talk about how kind you are and how great you are because you're virtue signaling and voting on the left, you know? And I just wish, I suppose, that there were more conservatives who were speaking out about this and saying something. Yeah.
I guess there's a weird reflex for them where they've been called racist for so long, even though often they are minorities and whatever, where they don't I see this, I definitely see this, where they don't want to use the same tactics. So what you just said right there is such a flip on the way we think of racism. I tend to agree with that line of thinking, obviously, that the people that are screaming about racism all the time now are the people who are racist. They really are, and I don't say that lightly because I don't like calling people racist, but they're the ones who are demanding we look at everyone based on race and sexuality and the rest of this nonsense.
And we have to call it out.
But I think there's a hesitancy from, at least from sort of where I sit, because I don't want to become what they became. But I know you're right at the core of this.
Look, I understand. You don't want to say everything is racist, but when there is real racism, you need to point it out.
Yeah.
And you know, the fact is that if we don't call it out, all of these kids are going to keep failing, right? What we don't realize is that all of these kids are going through school and are being taught to make sure that they're going off and voting on the left. That's how it is. Like that's how everyone thinks. Like it's so standard in the education system to think on the left that the few conservative teachers that there are out there, they're quiet. They never say anything because they're terrified, right? There is no balance of thought, and that's really scary, I think. And for the future of our countries, we need people to talk to each other. The stuff that you're always talking about talking to each other and sharing ideas and thinking about how the other side thinks. And I worry that we don't do enough of that. We don't do enough of it at school, that's for sure. And then those kids turn into adults eventually, don't they? And then we just, you know, well, I don't know.
And then they're really pissed at the system that they believe's failed them. And then they just perpetuate that through the next generation too. And then eventually that's unsustainable, actually, because then you have enough people that are turning against the system that's failed them. And it's because no one stood up and did what you're doing. But it's interesting because this is where a good old American classical liberal, and I know you guys, at least in the UK, have a better understanding of what classical liberalism, I think, than we do here. We talked about this a little bit before, that these words are all getting muddled and mangled and all that. But this is a place where, to me, where the government should be involved. I'm all for using tax dollars to do the things you're talking about. Where some, I think there are plenty of people that are American conservatives, at least, that want to just cut funding from all of these things and endlessly cut funding. As I said, I'm not for throwing money at them just because that's just the easy answer. But yeah, let's figure out how do we wisely use money to empower these teachers, and that sounds like that's exactly what you're doing.
Well, exactly. It's the power of bad ideas at the moment, that over the last 50 years, 60, 70 years ago, the schools that were out there were more like our school now. It's just that things have changed so radically, where knowledge has been sidelined. It's all about skills. People talk about skills and drawing it out of the child, like I was saying. And we've lost the purpose of education, and we've lost, the ideas that we have about perseverance, even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult, personal responsibility. If you didn't bring in your homework, then you are responsible for that. Whereas elsewhere, they'll say, oh, well, it's not your fault. You come from a difficult family, difficult background. We're going to give you an excuse. And if you're constantly being given those excuses, and if later on, getting into university, there are quotas, and if you're likely to get in because you're black or there are things that allow you. Oh, I tick that box. I'm going to be able to get in with a lower score. Then you stop setting those standards for yourself, right?
Yeah. And then don't we eventually degrade the whole system? Because
Exactly.
if you let someone in at a lower level, and then also let them get a job at a lower level, or get into grad school at a lower level, and then the job at a lower level, and everything else. Well, now whatever you've created as a professional is a degraded version of whatever that's supposed to be.
That's right. And that is what's happening, sadly. There's a whole campaign at the moment in Britain for this to happen with Oxford and Cambridge University, to essentially allow kids. I mean, it's really sad. And the reason why is because they say, hey, look, there aren't that many black kids at Oxford and Cambridge. We need to fix this. We do. I agree. We need to fix it. So we need to fix the education system. We need to fix our schools and make sure that they're given equality of opportunity.
Not the quotas.
Quotas.
Well, I'll tell you, that day that I spent at Oxford was such an absolute joy, and talking to so many kids just in the streets, and everybody was so excited to learn, and obviously they were sympathetic to a lot of the things that I talk about and all that. I'm curious, so I get it sort of on the sciences and math, and that you really want to teach them facts on this stuff. On things like history.
Yeah. Well, are there facts in history?
No, there are facts in history, but I wonder now, these days, where it seems like young people are kind of into socialism, or young people are kind of into communism or Marxism or the rest of it. Have you found that teaching history has become oddly, I was going to say oddly political. I mean, of course it is political, but oddly politicized.
Yeah. So like Hitler, for instance, is taught to death. But say the atrocities of communism and so on are not taught so much. Or even then, so rarely is so little is taught full stop, because they're not being taught properly in the classroom, because you are facilitating learning and kids are just teaching themselves. I mean, that, I can't stress how much of that is actually going on. So yes, things are politicized, and children are not able to access the kind of education that they were able to access before. And it's hard, because I'll say that and then people will just deny that that's what's going on. But you can see if you talk to university kids at university and ask them what do they know about the world and so on, what do they think, they'll tell you, and you'll see how much they've been taught, what they've been taught at school. So few of them have an understanding of communism and what it is. And that's because they're not learning it properly at school. School is, sadly, I wish that there was more diversity of thought amongst teachers. So one of the reasons why we watch a lot of you, the Rubin Report, is because I want my staff to try and think outside the box. What I always say is I can predict everything that you think about every issue out there. So if I know that you definitely voted Remain as opposed to Brexit with regard to the European Union for us, or if I know for sure that you would vote for Corbyn, the leader of the Labour Party in Britain, or if I know, what you would have to say about a whole variety of different things, even what newspaper you read, if I can make all those predictions, there's something wrong. Because, with me, I'm conservative on some issues, but I'm anti-guns, for instance. I'm pro-choice and pro-gay marriage. There's all sorts of things that I'm very much on the left on, but there's other things that I'm more conservative about, And that's because I'm a thinking person. Yeah, classical liberal, I suppose, in many ways, one might say that. The point is, I just want people to think outside the box, right? And I wish teachers would, and that there was more diversity of thought. And there is some diversity of thought, but they have to keep quiet because they're terrified of thinking differently.
How do you ensure that you get the right teachers?
Well, in a way, it's self-selecting. So when they apply, they're already people who are somewhat thinking outside the box, and then they come. And I think being at the school also changes their minds about things. They start to think differently because they're seeing what's possible. People can't imagine what's possible with inner city kids until they come to our school. I have visitors, teachers who are visitors, they're nearly in tears. They're saying, I can't believe that these kids are so nice. So that's what we're trying to do. And the point, and it happens here, I've been to see, so I said E.D. Hirsch, some of the schools where they use his materials and they place knowledge at the heart of their curriculum. I've seen some of those schools in the Bronx and in various big Queens and so on, and they're doing a great job too. I just wish more of it was happening, and that we could get a bigger platform to talk about it, because it's just so important. But people don't get that. They don't get that.
They're starting to get it.
You think so?
Yeah, I do. I think that's why these types of things are working. That's why you're half a world away, thousands of miles away, and you've shown the conversations that we're having here to your staff.
Yeah.
And the amount of people that are showing up to these live events now, the amount of people that are downloading these podcasts and all that, it's starting to happen, at least.
Yeah, well, I hope so. I mean, there's so much to be had. I've known tens of thousands of kids. People often say, why do I do what I do? Because I've known tens of thousands of kids who could have been so much more, right? Who could have been in a position to change their stars, and they weren't able to because the state is spending so much money on their education and isn't able to provide them with a decent education. And that's really sad.
All right, one more for you.
Yeah.
I want you to offer, so I know that I have a lot of young people, obviously, that listen to the show. High school, sometimes junior high school, but college, whatever else, just for the general young person out there that's watching this, that's in a school that's not doing these things, that's trying to figure out how to learn and think critically and get a good wide breadth of knowledge. But the situation that they're in is not everything you've offered here. What would you say to them to just start doing it for themselves?
You got to take personal responsibility. So you can't be a victim. You know, the whole victimhood thing is just stoked all the time in schools and indulged. You got to think, it doesn't matter where I am. Great, I haven't had the best luck, right? I would have loved to have been able to go to that local private school, but you know what? So what? I'm gonna sit down and I'm gonna work, and I'm gonna work really hard, and I'm gonna go to the library, and I'm gonna find the books, and I'm gonna teach myself if necessary. And I've known kids like this who have done this. I've known colleagues of mine and people who I've known, they make it their business to teach themselves what they need to know, and they need to know that knowledge is at the heart of it. You need to know lots of stuff, and then you can manipulate that stuff, and then you can be intelligent with that stuff, right? You can do it. You can. The thing is that it's rare that a 15-year-old takes that upon themselves to do it. By definition, they're exceptional. Most kids need somebody to guide them. And if their parents aren't doing it, then I think the school certainly can do it. Whether or not the school should, there are people who will say, well, it's not fair, school shouldn't have to do that, the parents should do that. And it's true. And you know what? If welfare were not as generous as it is and so on, the parents probably would have more agency and self-determination about themselves. And
the incredible catch-22.
Yeah, they would take more responsibility and they would do something. And sadly, the state hits them in both ways, right? Because it gives them the heroin of welfare, and then it suppresses them by not giving them a decent education. And then they sit around and they talk, and they say, I'm a really good person because I believe in giving people loads of welfare and in having terrible education. I mean, you know, you punch somebody on one side and you punch them on the other side. How on earth are they meant to succeed, right? And the thing is, we spend a lot of money in tax to have a state, and I'm a classical liberal, so I believe in a small state, but we do have a state. Let's use it for what we can, for the good. Yeah. But we're not doing that, and that's what's really scary. And we need us all believing in this idea of equality of opportunity, and that teaching children self-control will make them free, and having an ordered environment where children can learn will enable them to learn lots of stuff so that they can then be motivated to do something with their lives, because they will make themselves free by grabbing that opportunity. And it's that agency, it's that sense of self-determination that the conservatives, people on the right-leaning, tend to believe in more, as opposed to mummy state coming in and looking after it for you and taking care of you. Because if that's all you aspire to, then what's the point of living, right? But you know, you have to teach dead white men, right? Like, one of the big problems we have is that they don't want to teach dead white men because they're dead white men, and that's a problem, right? So they only want to teach. Recently, we had this situation where in Manchester, these students painted over a mural of Kipling. So Rudyard Kipling's poem was up there, and they painted it over and put Maya Angelou's poem by Maya Angelou. Now, I'm a great fan of Maya Angelou. I think she's brilliant. But one of the reasons why she's a great writer is because she read a lot of Kipling, and she read a lot of Shakespeare. In fact, she said of Shakespeare that she thought when she first read him that he must have been a black woman, because he would have known, he had to be a black woman to have understood the plight of black women, right? Because he speaks to the human condition, right? But he's a dead white male. Oh, we don't want to teach him. Oh, Kipling, he was a racist. We don't want to teach him. But at our school, we've got them reciting, you know, the poem If you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs. And blaming it on you, you know. But at the end of it, it says, the earth is yours and everything that's in it, and what's more, you'll be a man, my son. And that, you'll be a man, my son. But what about the women? How can you not be recognizing the women? And in a day and age where men can be women and women can be men, we can't allow this poem. I said, well, he's obviously speaking to me too, but there's outrage. Oh, no, he's only mentioned men, right? It's the most beautiful poem. Our children learn it off by heart, right? But children elsewhere will never have access to Kipling. Now, everyone has to be taught Shakespeare. Like, by law, you have to be taught Shakespeare. But the fact is, we indulge in Shakespeare. We love Shakespeare because Shakespeare is so beautiful and extraordinary. And just because he's a dead white guy, well, does that mean that he didn't write beautifully, you know? They're just some beautiful, I mean, you know, love is not love, which alters when it alteration finds or bends with the remover to remove. It's all so beautiful. And you want the children to be able to access this. And we teach them other poems like Invictus, which means unstoppable, and it was one of Mandela's favorite poems. And, you know, they say at the end, I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. And all of our kids put their hands on here when they say, I am the master of my fate. And there's nearly 200 kids in the lunch hall all belting this out and loving it because they are the masters of their fate. And it's teaching the kids that and inspiring them to make a difference with their lives, whatever their color, as opposed to saying, oh, well, there's racism and sexism in the world, therefore you're never going to be able to succeed. Because then you just give up. And don't worry, because there's welfare. So you can always just, you know, you can just take the welfare instead of making something of your life, you know? And that is what it is to kill a man. When you kill his self-determination and you kill his agency and you kill his motivation to do something with his life, that is to kill a man. And that is what the left is doing. And I say that is racism. I do. And we should say it out loud, but we never do. The conservatives never call it, and they should call it what it is. And, you know, well, what can you do? You just got to keep going, right?
What a beautiful ending. That's an ending right there. We're going to clip that one and do something with that because that was just perfect. Well, this is what it's all about. This is everything that I'm trying to do here. You're talking about the roots and the foundation of all that, and you're doing it. And I promise you, I will make it to the school when I'm in the UK for sure.
Well, that'd be great.
Can I do a little something? Can I give a little talk maybe? Or,
that'd be lovely.
Or we can do something.
That would be lovely. They'd love to hear from you.
Figure out something. This was really a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming in. And thanks to Douglas, by the way. So we were introduced by Douglas Murray. So,
yes. No,
I know that
great.
anyone's a friend of Douglas. You're in good shape. For more on Katharine, follow her on Twitter. It's @Miss_Snuffy.